Shabbat Shalom. Today we're going to talk about holy days for Christians. Now, this is something that most of us in this walk have already acclimated our lives to, but it is something that most of mainstream Christianity is pretty oblivious to this topic. And we're going to talk about how the holy days of Leviticus 23 were observed by the first Christians. They're applicable today, and our brothers and sisters in the Sunday groups are really missing out by not learning and adopting these practices. Now, I'm going to start out with a day that is not a commanded feast, but is a very eye-opening for making this the points that I want to make today, that people are really missing out if they do not observe the annual and weekly appointed times of the Bible. And that's a day that is called in Judaism, it's called Tisha B'Av, which means the ninth day of the fifth month. This is not a commanded observance, but it's very interesting. It's a very intriguing day. It's very interesting, and Judaism records this. It's something that Christianity should have recorded, but it's something recorded by Christianity. But this is the date that effectively by legend, but we can pretty much affirm it, that both the temples came down. They came down on the same calendar date, hundreds of years apart. So when you see things like this, particularly with the faith of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Yeshua, Judaism or Christianity, when you see these things, they're not coincidences. Yahweh is telling us that he planned something to happen. And so the dates of the two temples coming down are pretty literal, and either they came down on that date or it started to come down. And it's very significant. And the second temple coming down was prophesied by Yeshua, but it was actually prophesied first by the prophet Daniel, and then Yeshua echoes this prophecy. And sure enough, the temple comes down, but the timing of it was put in motion by Yahweh. So Yahweh builds up the temple, he takes down the temple. So I bring this up because cultures are formed around events and observances. The Torah establishes what a day is. The Torah establishes what a week is, what a month is, what a year is, sabbatical years, and jubilees. And everything else every other system is kind of, copied or adapted from this pattern that was, laid out in Genesis by Yahweh. So the Torah is very much intertwined with times and observances. And the culture of this world has observances too. So sometimes they're secular in nature, like annual sporting events. We have this big football game here in America that we watch every February. The other is the signing of key documents or other things that are religious in nature. And now the religious ones of Western culture are pretty much imposters of the real holy days of the Bible. Now, it's August 27th. August 27th, 2022, as I'm recording this. And guess what? There's a Christmas tree in Costco. Christmas tree display in Costco I saw yesterday. That's crazy, right? But that's an annual observance of Western civilization. A lot of people who wouldn't even call themselves Christians anymore still celebrate Christmas, which, do what you want to do. Our way is to not celebrate the pagan holidays masquerading as Christian holidays. But it's absurd to start thinking about this far out. It's August 27th. So you got to count September, October, November, December. That's 4 months early. I mean, what is going on with that display? But that is an example of something that even we who don't observe understand is part of a culture and part of an annual observance of a civilization. Well, those things were put into us, those weekly and annual observances were instilled in us by Yahweh, who made us in his image, and he made a calendar for us, and he made us want to have seasons and times and observances. So it's not early, however, to start talking about Yahweh's fall festivals, which begin a little less than a month from now. Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets, begins at sundown on Sunday, September 25th this year. September 26th is the day to take off work as a high Sabbath. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, begins the night of October 4 and runs through sundown on October the 5th. We do no work and eat or drink nothing for those 24 hours. Then Sukkot comes on October 10 through October 17, with the 10th and the 17th being high days. And this is one of the core beliefs of people who believe like us, is to observe the holy days of Leviticus 23, but to do so in a New Testament context, because those holy days were literal, they were prophesied, they were literal, they are prophecies, they have very many levels of understanding. And I'm going to show you right now how they were applicable to the first century Christians and how were expected to keep observing these days. The early church continued to obey the Torah, and those who were grafted in from the nations in the first century adopted those ways. And there are a couple of key points to prove this in the New Testament. Okay? So here is first scripture of the day is Acts 27:9. When considerable time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over, Paul began to admonish them. So this is when Paul was being taken to Rome as a prisoner. This could be 25 years after the ascension of Yeshua. And for those who may be new to this, I want you to know and understand that the book of Acts, the books of the Bible, were not written as journals. The books of the New Testament were written, like the Gospels of the book of Acts, they were written many years, if not decades, after the events that transpired within them happened. Okay, so the book of Acts was written after all of the things in the book of Acts happened. And this is showing us that the author of this book, of this work, who was recording these events for all posterity, is expecting us to understand that the fast is a reference to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and he's expecting this casual mention is showing that he's expecting all of the people who ever read this to understand that this is a time marker. This is part of their culture, that the first Christians would understand that if the fast was over, that we were moving into fall, and this is when people tie ships up and they stop trying to traverse the oceans because the weather is contrary. So this is something that looks like a hint. Maybe you think it's not much, much to this or whatever. But when you stop and think about it, if we said something like, we were sitting down to Thanksgiving and there was a chill in the air and the leaves were on the ground, you would know immediately that Thanksgiving is a fall observance here in the United States. That's exactly what this author of Acts is doing. And by the way, I say the author of Acts because it's not actually known. We don't think it's Paul because of various reasons, writing styles and whatever. Most of the scholars today would say that Luke probably wrote Acts, and that it's even possible that Luke and Acts are actually one book. But I digress. So the next proof here is Acts 20:16. For Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus so that he would not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hurrying to be in Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. Now, it's the same theme as before. It's the same book as before. But Pentecost is a late spring festival. Pentecost is mentioned here with its Greek name. It's not a hint this time. Pentecost means count 50. Hebrew would call it Shavuot. And this is the day of counting 50 days from the giving of the wave sheaf offering. Now, in Leviticus 23, it's very important. It's a observance that they had to do in order before they could have any of the new grain. They had to do the wave sheaf offering and then count 50 days and offer a leavened loaf. A very important observance and very, very nice when they actually did obey it. But when we go to the New Testament, we know that Yeshua, Jesus, was resurrected on the day of first fruits. And 50 days later, after he ascends 40 days later, 10 days after that, he sends the Spirit to the apostles who were gathered faithfully obeying the Torah on the day of Pentecost in Acts 2. So now, Acts 20, which is much longer time frame from Acts 2, Paul is still observing the day of Pentecost. He was trying to get to Jerusalem in order to continue to observe the pilgrimage festival. So the context again shows solid evidence that the day was known and observed by the early believers. Now keep in mind the book of Acts was written, we're talking 20 years after Yeshua ascended, maybe more. So if they decided to stop keeping the law and to stop keeping these days, it's very weird for them to continue to use it. If they would have recorded the time using a Roman calendar with a Roman dates, but it would be probably closer to the way we keep time today. So it's wonderful that we have this testimony, and these are reasons why people like us have adopted the Torah and adopted the commandments and live this stuff out, because it's pretty easy to see that they were doing it after the new converts were doing this in the first century. And here, if you want even more, is 1 Corinthians 5, 7, and 8. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Messiah our Passover also has been sacrificed. Therefore let us celebrate the feast not with old leaven nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So just to make sure we cover all the bases, Paul is instructing the church at Corinth to keep the festivals here. These would be Jews and Gentiles alike, and he's writing as if they are fluent in the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's saying, just keep the... He's talking about leaven and throwing it out. That's only Jews did that. Only Israel did that. The rest of the world thinks it's crazy to throw away your starter lump. And so let there be no doubt that they not only continued to observe the festivals, that they taught the converts to do the same exact thing. And we have evidence from extra biblical writings, from the councils, that they continued to keep Shabbat, they continued to keep the annual festivals and the Torah portions into the early 400s, because the councils kept trying to shut it down and the people wouldn't listen to them. So this wraps up the apologetic on the early keeping of the holy days. Let's move on. So Galatians 3, 24 to 29. Therefore the law has become our tutor to lead us to Messiah, so that we may be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor, for you are all sons of God through faith in Messiah Yeshua. For all of you who were baptized into Messiah have clothed yourselves with Messiah. There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Messiah Yeshua, and if you belong to Messiah, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to the promise. So I bring this up because of Tisha B'Av and how we need to keep the right mindset. Our Messiah was Jewish. He lived as a Jew, attended synagogue. He kept the commandments. And that doesn't mean we have to become Jews. It doesn't mean that we have to follow the rabbis, or particularly the things that came after the Second Temple came down, the rabbinic stuff after that. But we really do need to be respectful of the holy people and understand that Yahweh, as he made Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the whole line, to bring the Messiah, to graft us in. We become heirs according to the promise made to Abraham. That means we become the family of God. So being knowledgeable and respectful of the faith of the God's people is important. And it's also important for us to be respectful of the Sunday Christians too, because we were them at one point in time, and we became more enlightened, so to speak, on our walk, And we hope that both Jew and Gentile will come together, and we know that's going to happen at the time when Yeshua comes back over the 1,000 years. We do know that this merging is supposed to happen. So, um, and here's slide 6. Some more proof on this. Romans 11:1. I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? May it never be. For I too am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham of the tribe of Benjamin. And then in Acts 21:39, Paul says, I am a Jew of Tarsus of Cilicia, a citizen of no insignificant city, and I beg you, allow me to speak to the people. Acts 23:6, but perceiving one group were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, Paul began crying out in the council, Brethren, I am a Pharisee, a son of Pharisees. I am on trial for the hope and the resurrection of the dead. So these verses are up so we can see that Paul never eschewed his genealogy. He never shed his Jewishness. He never stopped keeping the commandments. And whenever he was pressed, he said, look, this is who I am. I am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham of the tribe of Benjamin. He says he's a Jew. He says he's a Pharisee. He continued in his commandment-keeping faith while being the emissary of Yeshua to the nations. And so this is to dispel the myth that when the Jews accepted Yeshua, that they like stopped being Jews or something like that. And it's just not true. What is more true is that the early, hundreds of years, but the first century Christians went to synagogue. Acts 15 says they went to synagogue and they heard Moses read every Shabbat. That's how they learned. So the converts came in. Now the converts didn't have to get circumcised and they didn't have to convert to Judaism. So there's some kind of a middle ground here, but they did keep the commandments. And so the big error that Christianity teaches is that once Yeshua came and died and was resurrected, that a brand new religion was born. And, I watched this movie called Risen on a couple of plane rides a few years ago. Oh, wonderful, intense movie about... It shows the crucifixion of Yeshua through the eyes of a centurion. And, it's a work of fiction based on the truth. And it was really good until the very end. At the very end, it shows Peter and the apostles saying everything has changed, and it's insinuating that the Torah and the law is done away with, that everything is gone, that they could just go and have this new kind of Protestant-y religion, and that just didn't happen. The religion, the way Christianity is observed today, bears very little resemblance to the way it was in the first century, except for the handful of us who have accepted the Torah and the entire Bible. So the New Testament doesn't also show, it does not show God turning his back on the Jews and switching to random Gentiles. It shows Jews accepting Messiah and continuing to keep the commandments while accepting the Messiah, and Gentiles accepting the Messiah and starting to keep the commandments. So that's what Revelation says, that the remnant is blessed because those who believe in the testimony of Yeshua and keep the commandments of God. That's the recipe. So we aren't to convert to Judaism, but we are still to learn from them in their writings, at least for the 150 years, at least until, the big splits and stuff. But the Messianic movement was a sect of Judaism until it was forced out for a number of reasons. So with all this said, as my apologetic day goes on, let's take a look at the fall holy days of Leviticus 23 because they are coming up. So Leviticus 23 to 25, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder by blowing of trumpets, a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work, but you shall present an offering by fire to Yahweh. So in English, we call this the Day of Trumpets, but that doesn't really do it justice. In Hebrew, it's called Yom Teruah, which does include trumpets, but it's more like shouting and noise. And so we have a conflict here with Judaism because they call this New Year's. They call it Rosh Hashanah, and it's not the head of the year. The first day of the 7th month is the first day of the 7th month. It's not the first day of the first month. It's not the head of the year. And I think that's something that they brought back from Babylon. So we don't always, or seldom, do we actually adopt the traditions of Judaism. Um, but it is the first day of the seventh month, and we don't adopt the Rosh Hashanah part. But I want you to see something that is from the traditions that Yeshua hints to. In Matthew 24:36, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father alone. So in Judaism, they have referred to Yom Teruah, the first day of the seventh month, as the day no man knows since before Yeshua. Because of the way the calendar works, the first day of the year, the first day of Abib, is known. You can see the things blossoming, sprouting. You can see this change in the weather, and you can know that the first day of the first month is coming. And then 10 days later, they take the lamb. 4 days later, they have Passover. So those holy days are very well scheduled out in the. I just banged my microphone. The holy days are really planned out and easy to see in the springtime. It's the fall holy days that are kind of hard to spot, particularly the first day of the seventh month. It comes out of nowhere, kinda. I mean, you pretty much know when the first day of the sixth month starts because they blow the trumpet. So you can count 30 days, but it's always kind of a guessing game for those who cite the calendar. And who, back in the old days when they cited the calendar, today we use a calculated calendar, and we will go back to using a cited calendar in the millennium, if not before. Um, but the date no man knows is Yeshua's hinting at his return being on the day of trumpets right here. And Paul actually reveals that to us in 1 Thessalonians 4:16-18. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. Then we who are alive will remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we shall always be with the Lord. Therefore, comfort one another with these words. So, Paul is revealing that the return of the Messiah is prophesied to be on the day of trumpets here, which is the day and hour which no one knows. So it all kind of ties up nicely, and this is the part of the Bible that mainstream Christianity is missing out on because they think that Jesus can come back any day. Well, I suppose he can do that, but Yahweh doesn't do anything until he first tells us through his prophets. I think that's from Amos. So we do have an outline through the holy days. We know that the holy days in the spring were fulfilled as prophecies with reference to the Messiah. So we apply the same framework to the fall holy days, the latter times, and we understand that Yeshua is coming back most likely on the day of trumpets. We just don't know which day of trumpets that he's coming back. So here in Leviticus 23:26-32, Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, on exactly the 10th day of the 7th month is the day of atonement. It shall be a holy convocation for you, and you shall humble your souls and present an offering by fire to Yahweh. You shall not do any work on this same day, for it is a day of atonement, to make atonement on your behalf before Yahweh your Elohim. If there is any person who will not humble himself on this same day, he shall be cut off from his people. As for any person who does any work on this same day, that person I will destroy from among his people. You shall do no work at all. It is to be a perpetual statute throughout your generations in all your dwelling places. It is to be a Sabbath of complete rest to you, and you shall humble your souls. On the 9th of the month at evening, from evening until evening, you shall keep your Sabbath. So, this is the fast. This day has enormous messianic meaning. It is a shame that Christianity does not observe this day. Again, except for the few of us who've adopted it. And the crux is to do nothing. Now, how many times have we heard that obeying Torah is trying to be saved by works? But this shows that salvation is and always has been through a mediator. It's always been somebody else paying the price. So the way of obedience is to literally do nothing on this day, to understand that we cannot save ourselves, that we need an external force to take away our sin. Back in the tabernacle days, the people did nothing except for a couple of Kohen. Today, we can 100% keep this day exactly doing what we're supposed to be doing according to the Torah. And this was the day of the sins of the people were transferred ceremonially, perhaps even literally, to the goats or the curtain of the temple. The high priest did it all once every year. But this is a foreshadowing of Yeshua's sacrifice on the cross, where he paid the penalty for all the sins committed throughout antiquity for those who accept him as the Messiah, which is why the curtain was torn in two when he died. Make sense? Makes sense. So Hebrews 9, 6, and 7. Now when these things have been so prepared, the priests are continually entering the outer tabernacle, performing the divine worship. But into the second, only the high priest enters once a year, not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. So today is just an overview, but the crux of the matter is Yeshua bore our transgressions. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was a type. Yeshua is the fulfillment. When he died, the curtain was torn in two, and the book of Hebrews goes on in great detail about what this day means. So for us to fast on this day, to observe it the best we can, is to honor our Messiah's death, which paid the price for sins. And now in Hebrews it says, it adds in, for those people, sins of the people committed in ignorance. So this is the answer. We've always wondered, what about all these people who don't know? What about all these Aboriginal people? What about all these people throughout time that have never heard the gospel? Well, Yahweh made a way when there seems to be no way. That the Day of Atonement is a day for sins committed in ignorance as well as the others. And what a huge blessing it is that Yeshua even takes on the sins of the people who don't know better. And he even said this when he died on the cross. He says, forgive them, they know not what they do. So you all see that how much richer the faith is when you adopt these days and don't build a wall and say that's just for the Jews. When you realize when he says forgive them, they know not what they do, as he's dying and fulfilling the Day of Atonement, which has some other fulfillment in the future that we don't quite understand. You see how people are missing out on this information by building up artificial walls and parsing out the Bible. It just doesn't, it's just so infuriating because we could see more clear than we saw before and wish other people could as well. So Leviticus 23:33 to 36. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, on the 15th of this 7th month is the Feast of Booths for 7 days to Yahweh. On the first day is a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work of any kind. For 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to Yahweh. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation and present an offering by fire to Yahweh. It is an assembly. You shall do no laborious work. Now we get to Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. This is the big fun one, the season of our joy. So after we have the day that foreshadows Yeshua's return, then we have the day of somber fasting that is for the sins committed in ignorance, among other things. And then we have an 8-day festival. And it's fun. And you should go. You should find one and go to it. We analogize this to to the completion of the gateway. There's a lot of analogies here, but we can sometimes analogize this to the representing of the 1,000 years, but the Sabbath does that too. We also equate the 8th day of Sukkot as the sign of completion and a gateway between the impure and the holy, the day between Olam Hazeh, this world, Olam Haba, the world to come. The 8th day of Sukkot is a bridge between this era and the beginning of eternity. When we observe this year, it's kind of a bummer of a bridge because we have 8 days where we get to fellowship with like-minded believers in spirit and truth. And we all have the same diet. We all have the same beliefs. We all get together and get to be comfortable for 8 days. And then we have to come back to this world. And it's kind of a bummer. But it's also, the 8th day is also thought to be the judgment day or the second resurrection. And for today, Sukkot is a time for us to fellowship together in peace and harmony, most often at a resort or camping with just our fellow believers. Scripturally, it represents the time the Hebrews were in the wilderness, living in sukkahs, and it's a remembrance of that as well. Which also ties into a remembrance of how this life is temporal, and that we have a given time span recorded in the books before we were born, that we're going to dwell here, and then we're going to die, and then we're going to be resurrected into one of two resurrections, where we either enter the promised land, we enter Olam Haba, or we, let's just not think of the alternative right now. So, whatever these meetings turn out to be, though, the feast is just fine the way it is. And I hope that you find one to go to. I'll be at the one in Wisconsin with my friends Don and Peggy and others. It's a very humble little festival, but very generous. And there are festivals all over the United States and even the world these days as more and more people learn the truth of the Torah. So Ecclesiastes 12:13-14. This is Solomon, and he writes, "The conclusion when all has been heard is to fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring in every act of judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil." This is the conclusion. The conclusion is to fear God and keep his commandments. I mean, that's where this starts for most of us. The Bible says it, so God meant it, so I'm going to do it. And then once you start doing it, the pieces start falling into place. And keeping the commandments, you learn, isn't burdensome at all, particularly these holy days. They're pretty nice. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun and a lot of fulfillment and spiritually enriching to actually do what Yahweh says to do to worship him. When you just capitulate, when you just yield to his authority and do what he told us to do, just like his son did, things become a lot clearer. It's a privilege for us to know this information, to be able to do it. These days are healthy for us. They enhance our lives today, and they show our faith in Yahweh and his son, Yeshua, while we await Yeshua's return. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a blessed rest of your Sabbath. And today, you could always stop by the website, listen to some more teachings, maybe drop me a line, tell me what I missed, or tell me what I shouldn't have said today. And I hope you have a blessed day. In Yeshua's name, bye-bye.